and welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. My name is Liz Wansmurray from the University of York, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with a key York figure in the Pride movement, Stuart Feather. It's also my great pleasure to welcome you today. So I'm delighted to welcome Stuart Feather to speak to us today. Stuart is an activist who was an original member of the Gay Liberation Front. Born in Crossroads, cum Leeds. I like that you're putting your phone on silent. A mill village near Haworth, West Yorkshire, in 1940. He moved to York with his family in 1951, where he attended Beckfield Lane Secondary Modern School. Painting since he was aged 5, he expected to go to art school, but was forced into York Technical College, ending up as apprentice engineer at Cook's, am I saying this, Troughton and Sims? He was outed at work in 1957 by 2 older apprentices, which resulted in him returning from lunch one day to be met by around 100 angry men, booing, name-calling and fist-shaking. After breaking his apprenticeship, he became a clerk with British Rail in Huddersfield, subsequently moving to London for a job in a travel agency in 1960. He attended the 3rd meeting of the Gay Liberation Front at the LSE in October 1970 and was immediately inspired by the people present and the ideas that they were promoting. Stuart is a painter and author of the political biography, Blowing the Lid, Gay Liberation, Sexual Politics and Radical Queens, published in 2016. He was also a member of the Blue Lips Queer Theatre Troupe between 1977 and 1993, which won a New York Obie Award in 1981. Really looking forward to hearing more from Stuart. That's quite an introduction to get through there.
It is.
Okay. So, I'm sure many people here are familiar with the story of Stonewall, the Gay Liberation Front, and the first Pride March in 1972. Tell us a little bit about your journey into activism and the experiences that you've had as part of that.
Well, I first read about GLF in a tiny paragraph, and I think it was in the Times, and it announced that there'd been a riot in New York by gay men against the police at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village. And I just thought that was extraordinary. A riot, and indeed it was. And then a couple of months later, there was another tiny paragraph saying that the Gay Liberation Front had been established in New York. And I thought, well, gay liberation, what is that? I couldn't understand it at all. That shows my politics at the time. I'd heard about the Palestine Liberation Front and the Liberation Front of the Western Sahara, but how did that apply to gays? And then sometime after that, at the beginning of October in 1970, some friends of mine were out in Oxford Street shopping, and they had a leaflet thrust into their hand by this guy they described as a hippie with long blonde hair and an Afghan coat. And so we decided to go along. My boyfriend at the time, these 2 friends, he was out shopping with on Oxford Street. And we did. And it was, as far as I can work out, the 3rd meeting. And I was absolutely taken with it from the word go. I mean, there were all these younger people, lesbian and gay, many of them bearded. They were all students, more or less, and many of them at the LSE, or some of them anyway. And they explained to us, new members, the reasons why they were asking people if they wanted to join the Gay Liberation Front, they had to come out, and the reasons for that was put across as, well, heterosexuals don't know any homosexuals, and therefore we need to make ourselves visible in order to make them understand that we're just like everybody else, except in one small thing. And I could see the sense in that. And then a lesbian spoke to us and said, I would like you new members to think about the ways you hide your sexuality at work. And I had this moment where I could see all the games I played sort of pass in front of my eyes. And it left me feeling ashamed, especially as I just sort of accepted the idea that coming out was really important if one was going to get anywhere. So that was the clincher for me, and I became, over the next 3 or 4 years, more and more active in GLF, and joined their street theatre group because I'd had some acting experience, and I thought that was something I could contribute to a street theatre. The other things were much more political, like the media workshop. I visited them to see what they were doing, and I was a bit taken aback because it was in this mansion block, and the first thing I saw on the bookshelves was complete works of Marx in leather-bound volumes, or I could see after a while that the only thing I could be doing is cutting and pasting to make a newspaper, and there were plenty of people doing that anyway, so it didn't seem the thing for me. And they were all the I'm going to say the creme de la creme of really intelligent, wonderful people that changed the whole face of of the gay world. People like Mary McIntosh, who actually she was so modest. She'd done this research, and she was about to publish it when she realised that she couldn't because it was coming up to, it was 1966, and she was ready to publish, but then Anthony Gray had succeeded in getting hold of Leo Abse, and the decriminalisation process was going to Parliament, and that was based on us being a medical condition. And Mary's research showed that really we had a role in society as we had a role in so many other societies around the world. She researched from Majai, Japan, to the tribes of South America and the North American native Indians, and came to a conclusion, which was that we do have a role in society, and that role changes over time, but is always ongoing. That's just one example of how things worked in gay liberation.
Did you feel that was kind of a liberating experience to need to come out to be able to take part in the things that were happening?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, it was such a relief. No more pretense. And that led on eventually into, well, through street theatre and performance. I gradually met other people who were thinking along the same lines as me, and those lines were really feminist. So many men in GLF would not accept that they were sexist in their behaviour and their attitudes, and were so to the women. It got to such a stage in the end that the women walked out of GLF because they couldn't stand what they were getting from the men anymore, and formed their own movement, Women's Gay Liberation Front. And my group of friends were all on the side of the women over that, and we started wearing drag, which later became known as radical drag. Everywhere we went. simply, it was the simplest way. Well, GLF advocated that everybody wear a badge saying the Gay Liberation Front, but all that did was lead to people saying, oh, what's the Gay Liberation Front? And you were saying to them, well, it's this organisation, and we've all, lesbians and gays come together and we're fighting for our rights and so forth. But when you put on a frock, you know, it gets right to the short and curlies immediately. You don't have to explain. It's so obvious. And so it saved all that bother. And of course, all this, what I call the straight gays were, you know, they were, oh, you're as bad, you're giving us a bad name. It was that kind of attitude. You're behaving like heterosexuals think that gay men are, you know. But we persisted.
And we're glad that you did.
Thank you.
Okay, so you grew up in Acomb and spent some of your early years here. What are some of your memories as growing up as LGBT here in York, and how did that influence your activism? I know we sort of talked in the introduction about the experience that you had at work, but kind of, yeah, give us a bit more, tell us a little bit more about that.
About 15, I think, I'd taken my sister to Leeds and put on a bus to Keighley. I'm
assuming she wanted to go to Keighley.
She was the bridesmaid, and it was she needed to have this fitting before the wedding, and I got the next bus back to York. But I was frightened I'd miss it, and so I wanted to go to the loo, and so it was a really awful journey back. But when we got to York, I just raced as fast as I could to a place where I knew there was a lavatory, which is just on the corner of Coney Street and the Lower Ousegate, I think it is. And I went in there, and there was a man standing a few stalls away, and I'd gone to the other end. And I sort of, I sort of looked over at the place. I'd never been in it before. I think I just knew it was there. I suddenly realized what he was doing. And I immediately I thought, oh, this is where you can meet men. Oh. And then I came out of there, and he followed me. And so I let him follow me up High Ousegate. And then I sort of dropped back to see what would happen. And he sort of dropped back as well. And then he went ahead again. And he went down Piccadilly. And there was a lavatory next door to the Labour Exchange. And he did the same thing again, and that was it. I had to go. I wasn't interested in him in any case. And his name I discovered when I found out where the gay bar was in New York, which was in the Punch Bowl in Stonegate at the back bar. And that's where he used to drink. And then not from him, but from other people, I learned, you know, his name, David Harbottle. And he'd been caught by the police, cottaging as we call it, in York. And he'd been prosecuted, found guilty. His name and address had been published. His family threw him out. His neighbours beat him up. He lost his job with York Council. Everything went wrong for that guy. And he still persisted and was caught again. And I think caught again, so that made 3 times. And after that, the police just gave up, and if they saw him walking around anywhere, they'd just grab him and take him to the station, and they'd, sort of shout and swear and threaten him to try and make him plead guilty another time. And that was quite a lesson.
Did it kind of impact on how you felt about yourself, sort of seeing that happen really openly to others?
Well, I felt very, very sorry for him, and disgusted by what had happened. Yes, to that extent, yeah.
It didn't make you feel that you wanted to hide away, though?
Well, that was all part of it. That was part of the culture. I mean, there was nowhere for us to go in York, apart from this one bar where you could meet socially. But the whole drive of society is to force us into the public lavatories. That was the only place where you could go and meet someone and make a friend, or just an acquaintanceship that lasted a few hours, whatever.
Yeah. It must have been really difficult. Although I have to say there's no gay bars in York anymore, so we're also in the same situation now that there's nowhere to go to meet people.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It doesn't get any better on that front. So you've talked a little bit about the Blue Lips queer theatre. So you were part of that from 1977 to 1993, so that's a long time. How did the theatre contribute to raising visibility and platforming the voices of the queer community?
Very much. I must say, first of all, continuing the radical drag trip, in the end, things developed where people were being thrown out of their bedsits and things by the landlords because they were wearing drag and stuff like that. So we all decided in the end to form a commune, and we squatted a house in, a film studio actually, in Notting Hill, and then we were surrounded by this whole district where probably the most heavily policed district in the country at that time, and lots of activists who were working on children's play groups and play spaces, adventure playgrounds, and forming creches and nurseries, and also housing problems, squatting, and there was also a group that monitored police activity and things like that. And that's all come back in a circle, and I'm with those people again. Only this time we're writing up the history of it.
How do you feel that it contributed to being able to get the message out there? You talked earlier about making people understand that, we're normal, we're just the same as everybody else. How did that kind of help that?
Well, in the end, it was down to Betty Bourne, who as Peter Bourne, had been quite a well-known actor in the theatre and on television and West End shows and things. And he decided to form a theatre group. And all of us had seen a group from New York called the Hot Peaches, which just blew us away. It was so fantastic. So we did our own version of that because we'd all been in drag. I mean, we were also perhaps in drag on stage. It depended on the role you were playing. And we had a marvellous writer, an Australian, who managed to sort of use his POM attitude about us to sort of enlarge our personalities, that you could. I mean, we were kind of playing ourselves, but but at the same time it was on a sort of comedic level, and very much a sort of the sort of theatre that happened at the time of the Weimar Republic after the Socialist Revolution in Germany, which changed the whole culture and the arts and crafts of Germany at that time, with the Bauhaus and everything else. So we put ourselves on stage, and we had, the first show was called The Ugly Duckling, because that's the perfect coming out story. And the ugly duckling was born to the sound of "Thus Spake Zarathustra," with all the eggs shaking like this to the music. And it was that sort of music hall variety. That was our flavour, really. Those were the shows that we'd liked seeing when we were young.
Uplifting, kind of, yeah.
And so that was it. And then we threw in tap dancing, of course, and the whole thing developed. And our second show, there was no money in this country for theatre at that time, but there was lots of it sloshing about on the continent in Holland and Germany. So we managed, the Dutch Pride group, the COC, sent us an invitation to go to Amsterdam and appear at their Pride event in Vondel Park. And that was 1971, so we did that. And the Melkweg, which was an alternative theatre in Amsterdam, sent one of their artistic directors to see us, and he immediately gave us a 3-week gig later, a couple of months later. So we went to Holland, and we did that. And when we arrived at the Melkweg the first time, they said, well, here's a list of all the theatres in Holland and the telephone numbers and the name of the artistic director. And we've got a desk upstairs, and if you'd like to go and do that, you could make yourself a tour. And or we can do it for you for a percentage. And I said, well, please show us a desk. and so within the 3 weeks we were at the Melkweg, we had 3 months work around Holland and Germany. And so it became this wonderful, we were constantly improving our technique and our staging. So by the next year, we'd earned enough money, and we've been very lucky because Vito Russo came to see us at the time of the Amsterdam Film Festival. He was reporting for the Village Voice, and he came to see the show in Amsterdam and wrote a piece about us, which the Village Voice published. And we'd made so much money so much money. I mean, we had £600 each at the end of the tour. It was nothing really. And we agreed that we'd have £200 to spend between July and September. We must pay Freddie Laker's Airbus £200 to get to New York and back. And the other £200 we had to show at customs in New York that we had enough money for our stay there, for our holiday rather, because we'd sent all the costumes off in advance. And we struggled a bit to begin with. We were all out house cleaning and that kind of thing, apartments and so on. And then...
Which year was this?
This was 1980. And finally, through an actor and a playwright that we met in New York in our favourite bar, called The Bar, and they had a loft in Greenwich Village, which occasionally they would allow theatre groups to use. And so They heard our story and we got on well with them, so they gave us their loft. And what with the Hot Peaches connection, we were very lucky because, and also the Hot Peaches knew people in Charles Ludlam's Ridiculous Theatre Company. And so we had all these queens from the Lower East Side in Greenwich Village come to see us. And they'd never seen anything like it, because we were doing something that Americans had not seen, really, which was ensemble theatre. There's a lot of upstaging goes on in New York productions, but we were doing ensemble theatre, and they'd never seen it. And it was something completely new to them. And Betty had been knocking on doors and narrowing his focus, and he got one art director who came to see it, and again he gave us a 3-week booking straight away after that. And then some guys down the block at the Orpheum Theatre, which was one step up to a Broadway, off-Broadway house, gave us 5 weeks over the set of a musical that they were producing, which hadn't yet opened. So we were doing 8 shows a week at that theatre. And then we came back here, and then a month later, the manager from that Orpheum Theatre was knocking on Betty's door and asking us if we'd go back, because the Joan Crawford musical that they'd had in rehearsal had flopped on opening night.
You're a
and they'd
replacement
nothing
for
to
Joan
fill
Crawford.
it with. Sorry?
That's impressive.
So yes.
It sounds like that was a really amazing time for you, and I think, you know, we can all kind of think about the impact that had really in raising the profile more generally. I just want to bring us kind of background to where we are today, really. So the discourse around LGBT communities, and particularly trans communities, has become increasingly hostile over the last 5 years. What are your thoughts on this, and what do you think that we need to do to start to turn that conversation around? It's a big question.
Yes, it is. It's the culture wars, isn't it? Started by Boris Johnson, actually, in 2010 and 2013, when he bankrupted the London, our own gay pride in London, when he was mayor, and privatised it once he'd bankrupted it, and also. Well, the trans thing is really the most important issue there is, unquestionably. And I think it's just working with them, with trans people, wherever one can, or what they will allow, or what they need. I think the whole thing now is about, I think the most important thing really is caring for each other. I think that's absolutely essential. I mean, there was a time when we were living in the commune that we had fantasies about an old acid queen's home, where we would all be whizzing round in electric wheelchairs with covered by crinolines, and we should have taken that much more seriously, because I've been working this last few years with people who've had, their partners have had Alzheimer's, and it got to the stage where they had to be put in a home, and then discovering that home, workers in there had been threatening them, beating them up, and just horrible things happening to them, cigarette burns, and inquiries are held, and people have sort of suspected of doing things. Some have even been sacked, but the way the regulations are, they can simply go to another care home somewhere else, and the record is scrubbed clean, and they can apply and get work again and carry on doing what they were doing. And it's really frightening. So I think a lot of care is what we need to do of each other, and just to value each other, really.
I think that's some very wise words. We're going to take some questions from the audience. So I'm going to try and see you against the bright light. We have two people with microphones. So if anybody's got any questions, if you want to just wave at me and I can point one of the microphones towards you. So this is this person, the lady in the green.
I've written it on my phone because I forget. We've got quite a lot of younger people from the LGBT plus community. What advice would you, or pearls of wisdom would you give them to carry with them throughout their lives? And similarly, what would you give ally advice, pearls of wisdom?
Did you catch all of that?
I'm not quite sure that I did. But my advice to younger LGBTQ people is love your community and come out where you can and when you can, and enjoy a guilt-free life.
Some of us here are involved in the Trailblazers project to create a statue, which is in the shape of a beetle, for or celebrating you and John Chesterman. I just wondered if you had sort of one message you'd like us to try and convey through that sculpture, what would it be?
Oh dear, I don't know.
And maybe PG also.
Well, it's been put together by a community group, and that is an excellent way of making friends and of doing work within the community, as much as a reward for yourself and as a reward offered to the community.
I'm really enjoying the conversation. I just wanted to go back to something you mentioned at the beginning, and you mentioned Mary McIntosh, who, just as an aside, was a colleague of mine. I'm a sociologist, and Mary was a sociologist, and we shared quite a lot of good times.
Hold the microphone a little bit closer. Thank you.
Bit closer, okay. So anyway, yeah, so I knew Mary, and she was brilliant. And as you know, she sadly died 10 years ago. But what I wanted to do was sort of pick up what you were saying at that point, where you've got GLF and you've got the Women's Gay Liberation Front. And somehow those morphed into the first London Pride. And I think it'd be really helpful to hear a little bit more about that piece of our history.
Oh, well, I'd just like to add one thing, if I may. That what Mary McIntosh did when she realised that her thesis would upset the apple cart for decriminalisation, she simply delayed publication until after 1967 and the Decriminalisation Act. And then she published in an obscure sociology magazine in California. So I thought that was just shows what a modest woman she really was, with her tremendous achievements. She did much more as well.
So what was it that kind of led to the first Pride?
What
How
led
that
to the
kind of happened?
first Pride? The first Pride came about in 1972. In 1971, the youth group had organised a protest against the age of consent bill, and they decided to hold it in Trafalgar Square, starting off with a party in Hyde Park to begin with. So that was kind of the foundation of it. And then by 72, it was clear, I think they'd had their first gay pride in New York then, and that idea had come over here. And so the youth group decided that 1972, Trafalgar Square again, and on that occasion, a party in the park after the march. And so it was organised by the youth group, all these young men, as young as 15, who were in gay liberation and for whom it was illegal to have sex, and they were liable to be imprisoned if they were caught. So it was a sort of mixture of the two and came together. And the women, yes, let me get that clear. 71, 72. Yes, the women came along under their own banner as Women's Gay Liberation Front. The split had happened in February of 1972. GLF began in 1970 and sort of collapsed in, well, late 1973, but the straight gays tried to carry it on in a different venue, but that didn't go anywhere.
Lady here at the front. Sorry, I'm trying to light in my eyes, trying to see.
I'd like to throw a Dolly Parton quote at you. Find out who you really are and do it on purpose.
Yes.
So you're doing that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. Of course.
You've had a very varied career because you've made it yourself. It's, I presume, some of the time been circumstantial. But it's interesting that you then got to writing a book, which, you know, is a bit of an uphill task. And did that alter how you felt about yourself and about actually being able to write? What actually happened to you? Did you get benefit from having published it?
Well, yes, I did. I think, well, life's a long learning process, isn't it? It certainly is for me. I've always managed to pull it off, as it were, when I blagged my way into something.
Fake it till you make it.
And yes, well, it did change my life, writing the book, yes, because then I started a whole, the other aspect of it, of going out and giving talks at Gay History Month and things like that. And I was sought out by one particular political promoter and who wanted to get in touch with me, got in touch with me, and invited me to meet him at ACT UP, at an ACT UP meeting. And I thought, well, this is very odd. Why can't he come, you know, to visit me if he wants to meet me, or I'll go into town and meet him. But he kept saying, no, I want you to come to the annual general meeting of the of ACT UP. So I did, and I met all these people, and the sort of lead people there, they weren't very politically organised at all, But they were doing so many demonstrations, they didn't know where they were going. They had no plan or anything because there was never time to think. So I said to them, well, I've got an answer for that if you like to hear it, if I can speak. And oh, yes, of course you can. So I said, well, in GLF, when there were problems that we couldn't solve in an evening's meeting, and there are all those problems that come up, like shall we have an office, and what about money, and things like that. And so what we did was to hire a library or somewhere for a whole Saturday and to form an agenda. And so we could go there and break down into small groups and discuss one of the things on the agenda between ourselves and then come to some tentative conclusion and then come together again and each group could speak and for and against and so forth and eventually reach an agreement and we called it a think-in. And they adopted it, and I thought, oh God, now I've got to show them some solidarity, So I found myself 3 days later in Piccadilly Circus with a megaphone and outside Barclays Bank and denouncing them, and then outside Starbucks as well. And I suddenly found a voice that I'd not had before. I was very good in small meetings. I'm okay in small meetings, but first, we used to meet at the LSE in a lecture room at least this size, and that was just too daunting for me to speak in at the time. But suddenly, in 2016, I had this voice. And then gradually people came together. Andrew Lumsden, who founded Gay News, which was Britain's first national weekly, well, fortnightly to begin with, and then weekly newspaper, and various other activists as well from GLF. And Peter Tatchell, of course, and we started becoming active again, and that led eventually until 2020 when we organised the 50th anniversary of the founding of GLF, and then and that was COVID lockdown time. But we did it by safe distancing. And the Metropolitan Police gay division or whatever, lesbian and gay division, asked if they could police the march, and their superiors said yes, so they all came along, wanted to chat to us about their spouses and so on and so forth. And again in 2022, when we had about 1,000 people we did the same march as in 1972 on the first Pride March, the same route and everything, only with all these younger people. And London Transport, open-top double-decker bus from 1952, the only one left in the country, which had to come up from Guildford to London to do it, and London Transport threw that in for free. So, so it was very successful. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there was a care home question because Ted Walker-Brown was part of the group. Well, to put it briefly, I was working with people I'd never worked with in GLF, and one could call them straight gays. And so after 2022, that was the end of the that little group who come together around my book in the first place.
It's so nice that instigated all of those things, isn't it?
It
makes
is,
so
yes,
much more meaningful.
yes. So that's how writing that book changed me. And it made me think much more as well about my own politics and how much more of a socialist I am than I thought I was. And I must say a Marxist too, because when you have Marxist arguments to face, you have to become a Marxist yourself in order to do it.
Thanks very much. Yes, I was just wondering, you were talking about Gay Liberation Front, Women's Liberation Front. So where did the Women's Liberation Front and the Gay Liberation Front work together, or was it a schism?
No. A lot of the women in women's liberation, I can think of Angela Weir, or Angela Mason as she is now, who came to GLF at the very early on and invited GLF to come on International Women's March. And then, of course, the women in GLF, the lesbian women in GLF, they went to Skegness, to the Women's Lib conference there in 1971, and that was being run by Maoists at the time, Maoist men and women. And they, on the Saturday morning, they had these boring lectures on, women's oppression, all based on the economy, and they were very pissed off. So at lunchtime, they had a little caucus, and they picked on, her name's Sarah Grimes, who was only about 5'9", I think, Sarah, and glasses, and was sort of very meek looking. But don't mistake her. And she went up on stage, and it was all controlled by these the Maoist men on the stage. And she asked for the microphone, and they just gave it to her. So she stood there and said to all the other women, I think we don't need this. We came here to talk to each other. There's a hall across there that's empty. May I suggest that we all go over to that hall and sit down in small groups and talk? And that was the beginning of it, of getting rid of the Maoists. Yes, the Maoists. Oh dear. And so that's what happened. And that became the start of a real interest in women's lib about lesbianism. And many women experimenting that way. And they succeeded against a lot of stonewalling to get lesbianism put on the agenda for the Sunday meeting. And so many women turned up for that in fact they had to form another group in another hall to accommodate all those people, all those women who were interested. So yes, no, we were all. The problem is men, isn't it? Really.
Didn't like to say, but women get it done, don't they?
Well,
we've got time for one more question. Is there a gentleman at the front here?
Thank you for your conversation so far. It's been fascinating. I had a question. When you left London and started to tour Holland and Germany, did you find that society was more accepting than you had back in England? And if so, or if not, do you think that still exists in Europe? Is there a difference?
Well, I'd be a bit out of date on Europe now, but then, well, homosexuality, I don't think changed in Germany until, I don't know, when the law changed, 1979 was it? perhaps there. I know it was after we'd done it here in the UK. I mean, the Dutch are supposed to be so liberal, but now one kind of thinks rather differently. We went to East Berlin on our day off. That was an experience. And we found this gay bar. It was the afternoon, and it was kind of a family affair. But it was very, well, I mean, they weren't used to sort of drag queens from the West with, you know, sort of painted fingernails that were all chipped off and stuff, and the, you know, the sort of usual mess we were in from last night's performance, and bits of glitter in your eye and things like that.
It's the best way to be.
But after a while, it was okay, and the owner's son, who was running the place, and his mother was there, keeping a beady eye on things. But they were suddenly quite friendly with us and wanted to know what we're doing and so forth. But this only happened because there was someone there in there who was known to be Stasi. And so, you know, it was like they were pretending not to have noticed us, or that they were kind of avoiding us or not collaborating with us. So that was East Germany. West Germany was marvellous audiences, I must say. It was wonderful. Very briefly, we were playing at this huge cinema that had theatre on afterwards. I mean, there were sort of, the boards on stage had great gaps in them, just perfect for sort of trapping stiletto heels and things. And Diva Dan, who was a marvellous performer, was singing Secret Love. And it always went really well because he was deaf and dumb before I met him. But in 1970, those new transistor hearing aids had come out, and he was able to hear for the first time, so he was able to speak. And he was a marvellous clown. And Betty Bourne taught him his consonants and made a good job of it. So he could announce Betty by saying, "Lady Loverly enters from the garden where she has been pruning the calceolarius."
Sorry. Carry on, you carry on.
I'll just say. So Danny was, after all the applause, and he took a step backwards, and curtsied, and took a step backwards, and curtsied, and took a step backwards into the scenery and brought it all down. And there we were behind in sort of underpants, wrestling our way into the next costume. I mean, they were rolling in the aisles after that one.
I know I said there was one last question, but I think this gentleman over here has been waiting very patiently. So we're
sorry.
That will be your last question.
All right.
Firstly, thank you. You're an inspiration, and it's wonderful to see you here tonight. But on the political front, what do you think of what's been described as kind of the gay washing? You know, you see rainbow flags now for Waitrose, for Great Western Railway, for all sorts of things, and you think, well, where's the sincerity in that? And then after that, one tiny question: when are we going to see Blue Lips again?
Well, I'm afraid we've hung up our tap shoes. They're now in a museum. Well, they're in the Bishopsgate Institute in the archive. Well, I agree with you. One of the worst things I experienced was when the LGBT film festival at in London, at the British Film Institute, one year they decided that they were going to call themselves something else, and there were all these proposals that came up, and I said that I thought it was going back on what we stood for, or words to that effect. And eventually they decided to call it Flair. And I think they decided to call it Flair because all these banks and stores and whatever, I think their customers or their clientele were fed up of all this LGBT stuff, and they didn't like it on their notepaper anymore, and nor did the companies that they were working with. And that's when that all seemed to be starting. And I just thought that, well, that's pretty disgusting. But you know, everything's sort of going backwards, if you like, and it's a struggle to keep swimming upstream. So I quite agree with you. It's not a good thing. All this pink washing, as it's called, I think.
Thank you so much for all the questions, and just to say an absolutely massive thank you to you, Stuart, for coming all this way, for telling us some of your stories, for answering all these questions. It's just been absolutely fantastic, so thank you. So,
Can I just quickly say, it has to be the most fabulous beetle in York that represents you in the partner.
We definitely want glitter on that one, don't we? Thank you so much for all your questions, for coming along. Please do check out the other Festival of Ideas sessions that are happening for the next couple of weeks. There's loads and loads of stuff on, so please do have a look. And there's lots of books here, but I believe Stuart's will be included in there, as well as some of the other speakers that have been part of the event so far in the Festival of Ideas.
I did bring only 5 copies of the original GLF manifesto. It's the 50th anniversary edition with me. They're £5 each if anybody would like one of those. Oh, right. There's 4 left.
There's 4 copies left. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Stuart. Thank you.